There's a reason why we're talking about resilience, and there's a reason why we're talking about networks. The way change happens and the way we engage with change needs to shift because the world has shifted. So it isn't just that resilience is the hot word now, or it isn't just that networks are the hot structure now, right? There's actually a rationale. So all I want to do is really spend a moment on that. And I'm speaking from patterns that have been observed across many, many communities around the world, in the north, in the south, urban, rural, communities with wealth, communities without wealth, that are very, very similar. So the notion that once upon a time, we thought that we could plan for change in some sort of predictive way, right? The dominant way of doing planning, conventional planning, here's where we are, time zero. Here's where we'd like to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Here's the gap analysis, this is what's missing, and here's the roadmap. Here's the strategic plan for getting from here to there. And kind of everybody knows that it never happens that way. It's this great collusion that we're all in, that you can lay down the roadmap and the strategic plan and it will unfold the way it's supposed to, except that life is complex and unpredictable and uncertain, and so all sorts of surprise gets thrown our way, which is why the shift from planning as predictive to the surfing metaphor to resilience. And resilience is our capacity to adapt to disruption. That's what resilience is. Our capacity to respond and hold ourselves together in the face of the unpredictable. So part of the reason why systems thinking has also gotten really popular again is because this illusion that the world is linear and causal and can be reduced down to simple cause and effect, that's breaking, right? We recognize interdependencies, we recognize the interconnectedness of everything we do. So this is we call this the two loops, and it's a very simple systems model of change, which suggests, no big deal here, every system rises and peaks and moves into decline, right? That's just how life happens. That's just how systems change. And whether it's a technology system or a political system or an ecological system, systems rise, they peak, they move into decline, and all that changes is the amount of time it takes. Somewhere around the peak, things get disruptive. Usually there are signals that things are disruptive, and alternatives to the way that it is start to pop up. So I want to use an example. If we say this is the oil economy, and we start to see turbulence in supply and demand and pricing and political relationships around the use of oil and the cost of inputs and outputs, you'd say something's going on. We've somehow, hit some sort of peak, whether you think peak oil has happened or not. We're somewhere toward the top of the curve. Some of us may think we're way far down this side. Let me just use a specific example. The United States hit peak oil in the 70s. We had an oil crisis. We had all this alternative energy activity going on, solar, geothermal, wind, tax incentives. It started to move into the mainstream. President Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House roof. So all this alternative activity is going on, and then a system will try to preserve itself and crush the alternatives. So President Reagan comes in, takes the solar panels off the White House roof, reduces all the tax incentives, and all this gets crushed and goes underground. But if you buy that we're in some sort of peak of oil, it comes back, and it's coming back, and it's coming back, and what happens as people start to experiment, they give rise to the possibility of a new system. So that's what's happening today, where we see an alternative energy economy really emerging in many places around the world and really getting some traction. What's the difference between it getting crushed and it thriving, we believe, is this. It's what happens when the pioneers who are inventing the new get connected to each other in meaningful and lasting ways. Because this system, when one is isolated, will crush it, co-opt it, or make it invisible. But if enough of them find each other and get connected and invent together, you create a capacity to respond and strengthen and grow and build this possibility. So this here in the center is why we're in the room. And the beginning of this is what we call networks, right? It's when people find each other and say, there's something I have to learn from you. But I want to make a distinction between networks and the term Nick used earlier of communities of practice. And this is a distinction that is really on our learning edge that we're exploring. We say that people participate in networks out of self-interest. That if I can get relationship, resource, or knowledge from participating in this network, I'll stay. If I can't get that, I'll go. So I'm here so long as I'm getting something. And what I'd say is right now, where the room that we're in is the possibility of a network. There's a reason to be here together. I might walked in saying if I get some value, I might continue or I might come back. If I don't, it was a nice afternoon. So we start out as a network. That's critical for this to happen, but it may be that even more leverage is possible in what we call communities of practice that Nick mentioned, where we share a commitment to advancing the field of practice, say building healthy and resilient communities, building an alternative energy economy, building a local food system, whatever it might be. We share a commitment to advancing the field that is bigger than my self-interest. And that means how we're related and what we create together, how I engage in that, the fact that I'm going to stick by your side even when we disagree because we're about something bigger than me. That's what happens when a community steps into truly being a learning community to learn on behalf of many. So this is, and then we believe that is a critical factor for this happening at scale. Many more people step in, you have greater experiences, greater intimacy, greater connection, and the rapid escalation of learning happens in that context. That can also happen in a network. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, and often people participate in the same room. Some have a sort of networky attitude, and some are really in it. But if we can create the conditions for people to step into a deep shared commitment and shared values and being willing to stick it out over the long term, then we have something possible, locally especially, when we do this in a local communities of practice where we really engage over the long term with each other in giving rise to what we're called to create. And so the opportunity today is to notice if that possibility is present in the room. Some of you are already in those relationships. Some of you maybe are yearning to find those relationships. Some of you may find that this isn't the right room. There's another place to go call it in. But just being in that exploration, and that was why Chris invited you to sort of just begin to taste the landscape. What is the ecosystem that is in this room where we can find each other, where our heart's yearning is, where our passion is, and where we'll get our work done more effectively. So that's a little bit of framing. And we sort of talk about walking out of the dominant system, not like abandoning our institutions. We need institutional life around us. It's walking out of the limiting beliefs that the way we've done it in the past is the way we have to do it in the future. That whatever is constraining us that says, I don't have enough resources, I don't have the right relationships, I don't have enough influence, whatever limiting beliefs we have, it's walking out of those and walking on together, claiming we have what we need, we can innovate together, we don't have to know what the answers are because we're inventing new things in new times. So that's a bit of the invitation for today.